You're listening to the College Football Connection here on The Connection, the official podcast of East-West Coast Connection. This is part 6 and the finale of our exciting bowl preview series here. It is time to preview the national championship game and what many can even be considered to be the SEC championship game with the way that things have played out. Be sure to stay tuned here and listen to mine and Adam's take on the SEC championship game is what I'm going to call it. That's what everybody here is calling it. Let's not dim this down any more than it needs to be. The national championship will be staying in the SEC. That much we know for sure, but who will be taking it home? Be sure to stay tuned right here and figure it out. The latest episode of the College Football Connection starts right now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of the College Football Connection. As always, I'm your host, Cody Johnson, joined by my co-host, Adam Gragg. Adam, I know that you could not be more excited right now than to hear me say that the national championship game here this college football season has come down between two SEC teams. You and I have both talked about it. This is the SEC championship game that should have been, and now we're getting to see it here in the national championship game. So it is essentially the SEC championship part 2 here between Georgia and Alabama. I know you're thrilled about it being the SEC homer that you are. So what are your thoughts on this game going into it? I mean, how are you feeling about this?
Well, I think this is the true SEC championship game. The SEC championship game we saw was a fluke. But I mean, I couldn't be more excited about this game. I mean, I think there's a reason why we talk so much about the SEC here on the College Football Connection. And whether, yes, I mean, I am an SEC homer, but still, I think we can all agree that the SEC is the best football conference out, or college football conference out there. No matter how much the ACC or the Big Ten may want to argue against that.
Yeah, you gotta shove that down here in about the ACC mentioning that conference for whatever reason, I don't know. But when you look at it, the SEC, I mean, they absolutely deserve all the rights in the world. I mean, this, regardless of who wins this game here, this is going to be the 9th national championship in the past 12 seasons for the SEC as a conference. And that in itself is nothing short of spectacular. I mean, you look at Clemson and Florida State, a few ACC schools have stolen a few national championships away from the SEC, and then you had Ohio State winning the other one as well out of the Big Ten. But other than that, I mean, it's been nothing but SEC. I mean, you had the long streak, what was it, 7 consecutive years when the SEC won the national championship? And it's no conference can, for a while, has been able to compete. As a whole, overall, when you look at the SEC, I still have a hard time saying that it's not the best conference in the nation. But the gap has definitely closed whenever you look at how big it was, say, definitely 6 years ago. When there was just whoever won the SEC was going to win the national championship. There's no question about that. So the competition's close, and I think eventually the ACC may be able to take over the SEC in football. We'll see about that going forward. We do have you all in basketball, however, and I will proudly own the ACC as the best basketball conference in the nation. But we're not here to talk about college basketball. This is college football, and I will gladly concede that title because it is well deserved for the Southeastern Conference.
Absolutely. Which I mean, I think. Well, SEC in basketball is doing better this season than what I think a lot of people thought. But that's all I'm going to say for that. We'll focus on the national championship game here. But no, this is well, you kind of discussed this off the air, but this is. I think this is the perfect national championship game. I know there's plenty of people going to argue against that are fans of a Big Ten team or Big 12 or ACC or whomever. But I think just for the simple fact that, I mean, you've got perhaps two of the biggest fan bases in all of college football, and you're playing in Atlanta, which is most likely the closest. Well, the two teams that have made it in, Alabama and Georgia, are the closest to Atlanta. With I believe Athens is only about 70 miles away from Atlanta, and Tuscaloosa is only about 200 miles away. So I mean, it not going to be too far or too much of a inconvenience for fans to travel to this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's right in the heart of SEC territory, which, I mean,
absolutely,
it's perfect, really. I mean, like you said, and of course, we may be a little biased here because if you've listened to us throughout the season, there's no question that of the two teams we probably spent the most time talking about has been Georgia and Alabama. So much praise there, and much of it well earned, without a doubt. But it's right in the heart of SEC territory, and it's very fitting that we would have these two teams play in this national championship, which I will agree with just kind of goes down to the point of, this is exactly who the national championship should be played between. It should have been Alabama and Georgia all season long, and here it is. And in college football, that is not something we've always gotten in the past. I mean, there's always been a lot of questions, and there were some questions about Alabama getting in or not. But when you look at college football as a whole, there's really not been two better teams than these two teams.
Absolutely, and I think the craziest thing about this is we talked about the potential matchup of Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship game. Talked about it for a good majority of the season, and then it didn't happen. But even better, and now we've got it in the national championship game, which was I have no issue in saying that I did not expect that until it came time for the selections to be made, and then that's when I kind of felt that both Georgia and Alabama would make it in and would make it to the national championship at that point. But the other thing that I was kind of going to touch on, I don't know if you, Cody, have really heard anything about this or not, but kind of the effect of these two teams being so close to Atlanta has skyrocketed the cost of tickets to this game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's been insane. I mean, well, when you look at the tickets for this game, I haven't looked at the exact price in a couple days, but I know the last time I looked at it, the cheapest ticket you could get was decently. I mean, it was over $1,000, and here it is. The cheapest ticket available right now, according to StubHub, is $1,200. It's the cheap seats for this national championship game.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I mean, I haven't seen ticket prices for a postseason event skyrocket to this point since the Cubs' infamous postseason run in 2016, when their World Series tickets were just absolutely through the roof. And that was a little bit more of a, at least in my opinion, a little bit more of a special event. And I can understand the reason for tickets, rising in that one, but this one in its own right is very special.
Absolutely. But I mean, on the I
like how you fall away from the mock when you have to laugh at this stuff as well.
But so on the opposite end of that price spectrum, I did a little bit of digging, and a tickets that are in the first row, right on the field on the 50-yard line, are going for over $13,000 in this game. I don't know who's got that kind of money to buy practically buy a brand new vehicle, but they are selling like hotcakes at that price.
That's insane. The crazier part of that is somebody's going to buy those tickets.
Yeah.
Someone is going to, and I'm sure that the people who get these are not going to be hard on money at all. But yeah, someone's going to drop 13 grand to sit at midfield for the national championship game, which in my own cynical mind I could never justify paying that much money for tickets to a game. That's
hard. Not even a Cubs game.
Well, I mean, now that they've won the World Series, I mean, no, because I couldn't be like, if I have $13,000 to see the Cubs win their first World Series in over 100 years, maybe that would be a thought. But now that that's no longer a thing, I couldn't do it. It's like, oh yeah, you can go to see the Cubs win the World Series. Like, yeah, but I mean, they won one a few years ago, so I'm not going to pay $13,000 for it. I'll just watch this one on TV too, like I did in 2016, and be just as happy.
And I thought you were a true fan.
There's a difference between a true fan and being logical. There's two different things there. Spending $13,000 for a ticket is very, very illogical.
No, I would agree with you.
But it's interesting though. I mean, what are we going to see more of? Are we going to see one thing? Well, I will say one thing is there will be more dollars spent for cheap seats than we will see total offensive yards combined by the teams in this game. That much is for sure. So there's no way that these teams are going to put up 1,200 yards, which is something that's insane. I don't even know if they'll crack 500 yards combined as two teams, the way that these two defenses are aligned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember what the total was, but I know that, the Rose Bowl came pretty close to 1,200 yards, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Rose Bowl, I believe, I know both teams had close to, yeah. So Georgia had 527 yards and Oklahoma had 531 yards, which was completely different from the game that Alabama played against Clemson to get into the game, in which Alabama put up 261 total yards of offense, and Clemson only managed to muster up 188 total yards of offense. Which that game was a physical, punch you in the mouth game, and honestly, Alabama's defense could not have looked any better. I mean, they shut down Clemson's offense. Every aspect of it was completely shut down by Clemson. They had no hope in this game from kickoff. Alabama, the score is 24-6, which isn't a huge blowout, but just watching this game, it felt like it was 48-6 or 49-6, because Alabama just made Clemson made them look like they didn't even belong in this game.
Yeah, well, I mean, they put on a defensive clinic. I mean, it was being the SEC fan that I am, it was quite enjoyable to watch. But if you're a Clemson fan or an ACC fan, I'm sure it was painful to watch. But
I was a little disappointed, I'm not gonna lie. And I mean, let's be honest, the turning point of this game, or what put this game away, was in the third quarter. Whenever Alabama scored the touchdown from Jalen Hurts' pass, I believe it's to De'Aaron Payne, just a 1-yard touchdown pass, and then immediately after that, Alabama got the pick six and just put this one away. I mean, up until that point, Clemson still had a chance. They were down by 4, and then those two touchdowns just put it away for the Crimson Tide, and now they are where they are, playing for the national title.
Yeah, that was that was quite something to watch. I mean, I had a smile on my face throughout the entire game. I mean, to see De'Aaron Payne not only get an interception up on the defensive line and get a chance to run with it for a good distance, but then on that same drive, they bring him back in to score the touchdown, the receiving touchdown.
Yeah, which is stuff that J.J. Watt is made of.
Yeah, you don't see a 6'2", 310-pound receiver very often.
No, never. That is a defense's nightmares to see that barreling down the field at you. I mean, how do you stop that?
And the crazy part is, I don't know if you saw the replay or saw the play or not, but I mean, he the way he kind of twirled around and tiptoed into the end zone when he made the catch, like kind of like a ballerina, was even more amazing considering how big of a guy.
He looked like he belonged there. I mean, he looked like a receiver. I mean, you don't look at this guy and he looked like an offensive player. It was amazing. Whenever he caught the pass, I didn't realize that it was actually him on the field making the catch until they announced it. And even then, through my mind, it's like, oh, okay. It's like, oh, okay. That De'Aaron Payne, okay.
Yeah.
But when you look at like the way that we look at the way that Georgia won the Rose Bowl, it was completely different. I mean, these two games couldn't have been any more different. And we kind of, me and you talked about this in our preview of the semifinals, and that was, these two games were pretty much exactly like we called them, exactly like we expected them. As we figured the Rose Bowl would be pretty high scoring, just because of the potency of Oklahoma's offense, and we knew the two defenses between Alabama and Clemson was not going to muster up a whole lot of points or yards for that one. But given the explosive tendencies of Georgia and Oklahoma, I was not surprised all that much by the Rose Bowl. I mean, Georgia won in a double overtime thriller, 54-48, in which we saw Georgia come back from an early deficit. But these teams both had over 500 yards. And the crazy thing to me was Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. I mean, Sony Michel had 181 yards and 3 touchdowns on 11 carries. And Nick Chubb had 145 yards and 2 touchdowns on 14 carries. And Georgia as a team had 317 yards and 5 touchdowns on 34 carries, which is just insane. Just insane.
Yeah.
Which how do you put that in words?
That's a perfect lead-in for a something that I had not even thought about until this national championship game. But with the Rose Bowl, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb actually have set the all-time record for rushing yards as a duo in the backfield, with 2,449 yards up to this point. So I mean, they're gonna completely shatter that record. I mean, well, they already did, but I mean, they may make it almost untouchable if they're able to get going in the national championship game.
Yeah, it's and it will be no easy task either, might I say. I mean, they're not playing a weak defense by any means. I mean, when you look at Georgia, they have, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, the second best passing defense in the country and the 12th best rushing defense in the country. I believe overall, statistically, their defense ranks about 6th overall for this season. But the only defense that matches them, especially in the eye test, is exactly who they are playing in Alabama. So it's not going to be easy for them to. I mean, they're definitely not going to get over a combined 300 yards between the two of them. That much is for sure. I would be astonished to see them get that against Alabama.
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. The only team that, when you talk about elite defenses, the only team that comes to mind that is better than Georgia, or at least considered to be better than Georgia, is Alabama. So I mean, this is the defensive matchup of the year. I mean, if you are a fan of a defense and you believe in defense wins championships, this is the ultimate game for you.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to look at this game and be able to say, or it's easy to look at Georgia's Rose Bowl game and, kind of raise a question too. Hey, everybody's saying this is a defensive matchup, but they give up 48 points and over 500 yards to Oklahoma. But, I mean, when you look at Oklahoma, we've talked about it all season. They've had one of, if not the best offenses in college football, mainly because of Baker Mayfield being Baker Mayfield. But I mean, early on in this game, I think Georgia kind of had the yips in this one going into it because they gave up, 14 points in the first quarter. They gave up 17 points in the second quarter, and then they come out in the second half, including overtime, and only give up 17 points for that entire half. So I think once they kind of got punched in the mouth in that first half, kind of came out a little nervous, didn't know what to expect being on this stage, they really settled down and put the clamps on, like we said, the best offense in the nation. So if you look at Georgia and you say this isn't much of a defensive matchup because of what they've done, keep in mind who they played as well as what they were able to do once they settled in and really stuck to their game plan.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that you have to take into consideration, which they better, well, I'm sure that they won't let it happen twice in a row, but I mean, Georgia also led to some of the Oklahoma offense because Sony Michel had a crucial fumble in the second half of that game, which it kind of everybody thought that was going to be the nail on the coffin before Georgia made their comeback. But I mean, if it weren't for mishandling the ball a little bit, Georgia could have and should have had that game sealed up in the regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. And they definitely cannot afford to make mistakes like that against Alabama because odds are they're not going to roar back and put up 50 points on Bama. That's not going to happen. But when you look at this one that we've already talked about, it's going to be very interesting. And one thing that jumps out to me in this one is you look at Georgia. Jake Fromm is an amazing freshman quarterback. I mean, he has gotten. We talked about it in our semifinal preview. He has gotten better in each and every game. It seems like especially since that beatdown they gave at the hands of Auburn. But in the Rose Bowl, he was 20 for 29 with 210 yards and 2 touchdowns, which for a freshman on this stage is a pretty solid game. Don't get me wrong. He is going to have to step up big against this Alabama defense, but Georgia focuses their offense on their running attack. And when you look at Alabama, one thing that they are hurt by right now is the injury to their linebacker core. I mean, they went into the Sugar Bowl without Dylan Moses and Sean Dion Hamilton was the other one as well. And now they have another loss in which is Anthony Jennings, who suffered a knee injury in the semifinal game against Clemson, and it's been confirmed that he is going to miss the national championship game. Now, they're going to have 4 linebackers on the field, but they're not going to have 4 starting linebackers on the field. They're not going to be at their best, and that could be crucial in stopping the running game, especially whenever you play against Georgia, who has essentially 3 first-string running backs in Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, and DeAndre Swift. So it's going to be something interesting to watch for this game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's almost with Alabama. It's almost like next man up when it comes to their, well, honestly, almost any position on the field, but especially linebacker. I mean, they've had to play that way for most of the year, which we kind of touched on in our last show. But I mean, they, yes, there's obviously going to be quite a drop off, especially when you're talking about somebody like Anthony Jennings. I mean, he's quite the quite the defensive player himself. But I mean, I fully expect this to be kind of a next man up type of thing, and I honestly don't really look for there to be any. I mean, I don't look for there to be much of a decline in the type of defensive product that Alabama is putting on the field. Obviously, the only team that has a running back stable that would rival Georgia is actually Alabama. So I mean, I think that if there was a team equipped to handle a running backs, the likes of Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and DeAndre Swift would have to be Alabama's defense, just because every day in practice they get to go up against Damian Harris, Bo Scarborough, Najee Harris. I mean, the list goes on and on for Alabama as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things in this game is both of these teams are very similar in which they dominate offensively by running the ball, and then they just beat you to death defensively. And that should come as no surprise, because we all know that Kirby Smart just 2 years ago was the defensive coordinator for Alabama, and then Georgia hired him away. So this game, you have to think Kirby Smart's going to be excited going into this one, just 2 years removed from his position at Alabama, facing his former team here with the national championship on the line. He's going to be wanting to stick one to Nick Saban, who he used to coach under. So it's going to be a big moment for him, but that's definitely one of the reasons why these two teams are very, very similar. But when you look at Alabama, talking about their running back core again, it's not going to get any easier for them, as it was for Clemson, because we talked about going into the Clemson game how Clemson had just such a stout defensive line, and that was one of the things that could cause some problems for Alabama. And yeah, they had 141 rushing yards, but they really had nobody on Alabama had a big offensive game. Nobody on either team did. So it's going to be interesting to see. Now they're facing a Georgia team who's 12th ranked in the rush defensively as a unit. It's going to be interesting to see what they do, because that Georgia is going to be focused more heavily on the run than the pass, because Jalen Hurts still hasn't convinced me that he's a great passing quarterback. He had his moments against Clemson, but overall he's 16 for 24 with just 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. That being said, he done what he needed to do, but he didn't really have to make a lot of big plays against Clemson. I still think the formula to beat Alabama is to force get up early and force Jalen Hurts to make some big plays and to try to beat you. And as good as this Georgia defense is, ranked second in the nation once again, I question Jalen Hurts' ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, which we kind of talked about that in the previous show. But I mean, there's absolutely no secret the fact that, I mean, Jalen Hurts it's almost like he forgets how to play when he's put under pressure. I mean, now he showed some good signs and some bad signs. I mean, there was a great play, which I pointed out to you actually, where he was put under pressure fairly early in the game, and he ended up throwing a touchdown to Calvin Ridley. Now, the downside of that, there's no downside really after the result of it, but the only nitpicky thing I have for that one is the fact that if Jalen Hurts had just stayed in the pocket just a little bit longer and gone through his progressions instead of kind of doing his typical, when he gets under duress, he just wants to start going on the run. If he'd stayed in a little bit longer, he would have seen that Calvin Ridley was wide open to begin with, instead of having to extend the play and Calvin Ridley having to get open yet again. But he did what he needed to, and at least in that case under pressure. But there were some other plays where he basically caved under the pressure. So he's improved in it, but it's also his downfall.
Yeah, I mean, in order for Alabama to win this game, they're going to have to have a very similar. They're going to have to have a similar approach to this game as they had to Clemson, in the fact of their defense is going to have to win this game for them because looking at a Georgia defense who's very similar to Clemson and even better than Clemson's defense, it's going to be hard to rely on their offense because you have to suspect that Georgia's going to slow down the running game as well. So I think they're going to have a very similar approach to this. Defensively, the big thing is that Georgia will run the ball, and the big difference between Georgia and Clemson is Clemson relies a lot on Kelly Bryant and his ability as a dual threat quarterback to make plays. When you look at Georgia, they're going to run the ball down your throats, but they're also going to have a fresh 5-star first-string running back on the field regardless of what point it is in the game. If somebody gets tired, they can easily switch between Chubb, Michelle, and Swift and just continue to run the ball down your throats. That being said, it's going to be interesting to see how Jake Fromm responds to playing this elite Alabama defense. I mean, in the semifinal game, I was impressed with how Fromm looked. He played a pretty solid game, and like I've said, I've been high on him. He's been getting better and better. But now he's going against the standard in college football as a freshman on the biggest stage. How is he going to respond to that? Jalen Hurts has been here before. He's been in a national title game. He's lived his mistakes, in which he's lost a national title game just a year ago as a freshman. Well, how will Jake Fromm respond? He's got the talent. He's a better quarterback than Jalen Hurts. Definitely a better passer. How is he going to respond to being in the spotlight, though? It's going to be an interesting key for the Georgia offense because if Jake Fromm can get going, if he has a big game, I have no question that Georgia is going to win. It's just a matter of if he will.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking on the other side of the ball, I think the one good thing that the Alabama defense has going for them is they don't have to worry about that dual threat quarterback, because although Clemson wasn't able to do much, I mean there were some plays that stayed alive that shouldn't have just because of Kelly Bryant's feet, and Georgia doesn't have that. I mean, granted, they counter that with their elite of the elite running backs, but still, I think that's a worry and perhaps an advantage a worry eliminated and an advantage to the Alabama defense as far as they can focus on the running backs and not having to focus on the running backs and the quarterback as far as the run game is concerned.
Yeah, and that could be, well, like you said, that can be a little bit easier to defend. Or, the sense of you're not always worrying about, well, is Jake Fromm going to run or not? Because odds are he's not going to. But, like we said, Georgia's a whole different beast in itself. But going on to this one, what's your thing to look for in these teams as we begin to break down, say, who you think's going to win? Because I know that you've broken this down a lot more in detail than I have. Of course, you being our college football expert here. So what are you looking for out of each team in this one?
Well, I mean, in this one, it's I mean, you almost couldn't get two more evenly matched teams, but I mean, if you really, I really had to sit there and kind of break it down to kind of come to my conclusion. But just to give you a quick look into how I attempted to come about my decision. I mean, I think that on the offensive side of the ball, you've got, if you look at the receiving core, I think the fact that Alabama does have Calvin Ridley, but he's really their only big threat at wide receiver, whereas Georgia has Terry Godwin and Javon Wims, which has led to the kind of the reason why Jake Fromm has been able to be so good this year. So I mean, Georgia definitely has the defense when it comes to receiving core, but I mean, Alabama has the best offensive line in the SEC, hands down, in my opinion. I mean, they've got an all SEC Frankel and Jonah Williams, and the rest of their offensive line from some sports company, or whether it be ESPN or Sporting News or Athlon or whomever. I think 4 out of their 5 offensive line were voted as first or second team all SEC. So Alabama, without a doubt, has the advantage on the offensive line. At quarterback, I actually feel that just because Jalen Hurts is a dual threat, he kind of Alabama would take the advantage at quarterback. Without a doubt, Georgia has the advantage at running back with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. And on the defensive side of the ball, this is where I'm really looking for perhaps what you could say an X factor or a matchup to watch. I think one of the big matchups to watch is really going to be Alabama's front 3 versus Georgia's running backs, and whether or not they try to run it up the middle or run it to the outside. I mean, I think Georgia's going to, if they don't start the game out that way, they'll have to start running it out to the outside because, I mean, when you have a front 3 of Deshaun Hand, Deron Payne, and Raekwon Davis, I mean, those 3 were complete nightmares on the Clemson offense, and they were the main reason why Clemson couldn't get anything going, because they had Kelly Bryant under pressure all game long. I mean, I think they had what did they have? At least 6. I think they had at least 6 sacks, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 sacks. But I mean, he was literally.
I believe it was 6 was the total, but I'm not for sure. It's coming off the top of my head, but I believe you are correct. Yeah, I believe it was 6. I believe you're right on that.
But I mean, they had Kelly Bryant under pressure all night long, and their linebacking core arguably played their best game of the season. But hands down, Georgia's linebacking core is much better than Alabama. I mean, when you have the Butkus Award winner in Roquan Smith, and then you've also got Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy, and Reggie Carter in that 3-4 defense. That's just a scary linebacking core in my opinion. But to round out my kind of summary of things, the secondary advantage has to go to Alabama in my opinion, just because they got Minkah Fitzpatrick and Ronnie Harrison as safeties, and then Anthony Averett at cornerback is no slouch either. So there's advantages and disadvantages. I mean, this is probably the most even matchup of any game this season between any 2 teams. It's honestly, it took a lot of thought and thinking into who my pick was going to be, but there were a couple other things I was going to talk about. I don't know what. Do you have any other comments or thoughts that kind of went into your decision, Cody, before you give your decision?
I mean, you've pretty much hit the nail right on the head there with, pretty much my thought process, and I've talked a lot about some of the things I expect each of the teams to do, and I think that pretty much everything that I've went into my thought process has been pretty much said here, and you put the icing on the cake there. And I'm not so sure you'll be surprised by mine. I know one thing that is at least interesting going into this game is, the game is played in Atlanta, and so immediately you would think that home field advantage to Georgia. That's not necessarily the case. Like we said, it's very close to both universities. I mean, it's 70 miles away from Georgia's campus and 200 miles away from Alabama's. But Alabama really, really, really likes playing in Atlanta. They are 6-0 in Atlanta since 2014. I mean, they've won big game after big game in there. I mean, they've won 3 SEC title games in Atlanta. They won a college football playoff semifinal game in Atlanta, all of those being in the Georgia Dome, of course. And then Alabama linebacker Mack Wilson has also said, we treat Atlanta like it's our home. We win a lot of games there. So they like playing in Atlanta. However, you have to wonder how that's going to rub Georgia, considering that is their home turf. So home field advantage will be interesting. I think it'll lean a little bit more towards Georgia, just obviously geographically they're closer. But we know that Alabama travels well. We know they like to play in the city. So it's not going to be an overwhelming home field advantage, I think, if any at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one other fact, well, not one other fact about this matchup is, and obviously it's really not going to take the current team and the players on the team. This almost has no effect on the game, but I do find it interesting that Alabama is the only team to have already done what they're doing, and that is they back in 2012 they did not win their conference championship, but yet they still made it into the national championship game and beat LSU 21-0. And mind you, that was done in LSU's backyard in New Orleans. So they've already done this. Like I said, obviously that was 2012, so nobody on the team now was in that game or around for that game. But I just I find it interesting, and I think Nick Saban is probably using that along with many other things as a motivational tool for this national championship game.
Yeah, I mean it's easy. It's easy to be prepared for a game whenever you have Nick Saban calling the shots there. I mean, he can be prepared for anything. I mean, his resume speaks for itself. And this game is significant for him because if he wins this game, he will tie Alabama great Bear Bryant for national championships won by a coach. Bear Bryant, of course, won those 6 national championships from the span between 1961 and 1979. He actually won 3 in a 5-year stretch from 61 to 65. If Nick Saban wins on Monday, like I said, that'll tie him, but it will also be his 6th national championship since 2003 and his 5th in the last 9 years. So definitely some history on the line for Nick Saban, of course, and we've grown to expect nothing less out of him. And an interesting fact on this as well is, if he wins, he will become the fastest head coach to win 6 national championships. And even if he loses, then he'll have each of the next 2 seasons to attempt to break that record to become the fastest head coach to 6 national championships. So it'll be interesting for Saban, history on the line, and like I said, his track record speaks for itself. Of course, he has another great opportunity to expand what is already going to be a resume that's impossible to replicate, I believe, ever in the head coaching category.
Absolutely. I mean, you already kind of hit the nail on the head. I had that as a note for this game as well. When you think championship football, Nick Saban has been, and always will be one of the first coaches to come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, and that's in any sport, I mean, at least in my lifetime, Alabama football is legitimately, well, Alabama football and UConn women's basketball are the only 2 teams to where you can go into their sport before the season starts and be like, oh yeah, they're going to win the national championship, and probably be right. They're at least probably going to play for the national championship. I mean, sometimes, you look at college football and it's like, oh, well, Alabama's going to win. Let's see how everything else shakes out. And the same thing in women's college basketball, and this is not a knock on women's basketball, but it's almost not fun to watch because at the end of the year, it's going to be, well, UConn's probably going to win, so what's the point in watching this? But it does make it more exciting when they do lose. Because when they do lose, it's like, oh my God, they beat Alabama or they beat UConn. It's such a huge deal.
Absolutely. So I think without any further ado, I'm ready to give my pick on this game.
And one thing I will say before you make your pick, this game is not only interesting from the standpoint that it is the national championship game, but you and I are also tied right now in the win-loss column for our bowl previews this season. So whoever predicts the national champion correctly, assuming that we have two different takes on this, could also take home bragging rights this bowl season.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's been quite an interesting, which we may have a chance to get a little bit more in depth into that in another show. But it's been quite an interesting back and forth with our bowl picks this bowl season. I believe I was down by, was it down by one game or two games coming into the national championship?
Yeah, you were down by one game, I believe. I know I had one. I believe it was. Yeah, December 30th, I did not have a good day at all. I went winless on that day. So that one kind of hurt me, but here we are. I'm just glad that it's coming down to the national championship game and not the Outback Bowl like we thought that it may come down to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the game the game that put me back in a tie with you was the Sugar Bowl. I had Alabama winning. You had actually you stayed home with your ACC pick for Clemson, and
I had to stay with the
ACC.
Well I couldn't pick against the ACC, and had I thought through it a little bit more, perhaps I would have already had it locked up. But without further ado, Adam, who is your national champion this season?
So my pick for national champion is I'm ashamed to say that I'm not going with my pick from our last show because I know I'd already made my pick, but I can't tell you how much my mind was changed after I saw Alabama's defense play Clemson. I'm going with Alabama to win the national championship. I just think that Alabama they're firing on all cylinders. They they've had a chance to get healthy, or at least get healthy enough in the areas where they need to, with the long layoff between the end of the regular season and the college football playoff semifinal games. So I look for Alabama's defense to be just too much, and I think that their secondary can contain Georgia's passing game enough to keep them one-dimensional in this game.
Yeah, and this game, whenever I look at this game, it is so hard for me to predict because realistically, I can see this game going either way. I mean, it's not too far-fetched to think that Georgia would win this game, and it's not too far-fetched to believe that Alabama would win. There's two evenly matched teams who do the same things very well. Now, we've talked about how much they look almost exactly like the same team on paper, but I have to stick with my guns here. I've said it since, I believe, week 5 or 6 of the regular season, but the Georgia Bulldogs are going to win the national championship. I have a hard time switching there. I've thought about it. I've rode with them pretty much all season. I have to go through it, and like you said yourself, I'm pretty much a Georgia fan at this point, so I have to stick with my team there. I think that Alabama's defense did impress me against Clemson. And I think when you look at Georgia in that second half against Oklahoma, they really looked like the Georgia team that we have known all season. I believe defensively these two teams match up very evenly. And I believe the one thing that Georgia is going to do is they already have an elite passing defense. You pair that with Jalen Hurts and his arm that I still do not trust and not sure that I ever will. And I believe that they're going to take advantage of that. There's going to come a point where Alabama may have to pass the ball, and I'm not so sure they can do it. And I believe that eventually one of these three running backs from Georgia will solve Alabama's defense and maybe not have a huge game, but at least have a few big plays and eventually wear the defense down somewhat and crack through and put up some points on the board. So I'm going with Georgia in this one.
Interesting. All right, you you had me guessing the whole time. You can't really go wrong picking either team. But I think kind of like I said earlier in the show, I don't know. I just feel that the fact that Alabama won't be facing a dual threat quarterback in this one is going to play to their advantage, and I look for their defense really to help in creating points for them. I think that I think Georgia's offense is as a whole is better, but I think their defense wins championships. They showed it against Clemson. I think they'll show it again against Georgia. I think that Alabama will be able to score points on defense, whereas Georgia won't. And I think that's going to be where the point differential comes from.
It's going to be interesting to see for sure. I believe that defensively, these two teams are almost even. So I think going on to that, you talk about Georgia's offense being a little bit better, or being better overall as a unit. I think that's what in the end will end up giving them a national championship, just because they match up so well defensively. Georgia, I believe, being better has a better chance to crack the Alabama code defensively than Alabama does against Georgia.
Absolutely. So this will be exciting. I'm confident in Alabama. You're confident in Georgia, and this will also decide which one of us comes out on top in our bowl picks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm excited for it. It's a national championship, and it's going to decide some bragging rights as well between the two of us. Who's going to win the bowl season? Is it going to be the college football expert or the MLB expert? So who knows? That's not always a do-all, end-all there, because let's be honest, Adam's bowl picks have been much better than my MLB playoff picks were for the postseason there. So just because you obsess over it and watch it all the time, the postseason is still one thing that is difficult to predict.
Yeah, which I do want to get a little shot in there and add that yes, I may be 17-17 overall, just as you are with the bowl season as a whole. But right now I am 6-0 with the college football playoff picks as far as predicting who's going to make it in and who's going to win the semifinal. So we're looking at
you're due a loss. You're due a loss.
We're looking at 6-0. Looking to go 7-0 in my picks. So my perfect record is on the line, but I'm confident that it will stay perfect. And if I'm not mistaken, Cody, I believe you, not too shabby for an MLB expert, or 4-2, because you only missed the Alabama pick to get into the college football playoff, and then you again missed the Alabama pick to make it to the college football championship. So you may again miss the Alabama for a third time to win it. But
I've picked against them 3 times now, so third time's the charm, as they say. So maybe this will be the one that I guess right.
Yeah, well, what's the saying? You can always hit the broadside of a barn once in a million times when you're blindfolded, or something like that.
Something like that. It's somewhere along those lines. I can't remember the exact.
I think I
saying,
completely
but
screwed that up, but it still makes sense.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Enough sense to get your point across. That's all that matters. But nonetheless, there it is. That's all we have for you tonight. Be sure to tune in after the national championship game. We're going to have a season recap and a bowl season recap, and figure out who won the bowl series previews between Adam and I. Once again, that will come down to this national championship game. I'm excited for it. I know Adam is beaming for excitement for it. He's already just happy enough that there's 2 SEC teams in there. That's enough for him. So be sure to catch us next time here on the College Football Connection.